Welcome to the Filmed Live Musicals podcast, a podcast about stage musicals that have been legally filmed and publicly distributed. The Filmed Live Musicals website contains information on nearly 200 musicals that have been captured live. Check it out at filmedlivemusicals.com. And now, on with the show. Welcome to the Filmed Live Musicals podcast. I'm your host, Luisa Lyons, and my guest today is producer, choreographer, singer, and hostess Nicole Holst. Nicole has produced a range of cabaret and burlesque shows from New York to California, and her latest venture is the Zeigfeld Girls Revue, a show celebrating the stories of the original Follies girls, including Mae Murray, Olive Thomas, Louise Brooks, Julie Newmar, and Fanny Brice. The Ziegfeld Girls Revue will be live streamed from the Green Room 42 in New York City, just 3 blocks down from the new Amsterdam Theatre, home of the original Ziegfeld Follies. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you so much. That was such a lovely introduction.
Oh, you're welcome. So to start us off with, what made you fall in love with musical theater?
Oh, the first memory I have of it, and I guess, not everyone would consider this musical theater, but I did because I was from a small town. And the first thing I saw was The Wizard of Oz, the movie. And I had wandered into a neighbor's house and, I was always kind of an inexhaustible kid. My mom said it was exhausting, always had to have something to do. But this was the first thing that got me to sit still for more than like 10 minutes. I was just fascinated by it. And I'll never forget that moment when she walked from the black and white to the color and started this big journey, which I feel like has paralleled mine in a lot of ways. And it just opened up the world of magic and music and dance and theater to me. And then, I did some musical theater in high school. I did Anything Goes then. Was a dance major in college, but later on I did community theater, and I loved, sort of the sexy musicals like cabaret. I always loved Fosse, just the blend. And what I think is similar to this show, it's like the blend of sexiness, but also technique and talent and, trained dancers and performers. And a lot of the women in this show have a background in that musical theater and that kind of thing, well-rounded, right? So I was just fascinated by how they make other worlds, right, out of just anything, right? So taking what's in your imagination and making it real. And that's something I feel privileged to still be doing.
That's very beautiful. And I think that, saying The Wizard of Oz is a movie musical, and there's so much crossover between movie musicals and musical theater, and like they're all kind of the same world. They're different mediums, but and filmed live musicals is an interesting blend of those two things. But they absolutely cross over, and they influence each other all the time. They're just always borrowing from each other. So
yeah,
I think
it started that way actually, right? Wizard of Oz was a theater show in New York first, and then became a movie. And a lot of the actors, like Burt Lahr, the lion, was a vaudeville actor, right? So, and same with the Follies girls. I mean, a lot of them started theater and then they ended up in the movies, right? Or were vaudeville originally. So it all comes from there somewhere along the line, right?
And even Miss Ethel Gum started on the vaudeville circuit.
Exactly, yeah.
Before she became Miss Judy Garland. What led you to study dance in particular?
Oh, so I started dance young, and then my mom said I saw a tap dancer on TV, and I said I have to do that. And she put me in, but it was midway through kind of the semester, if you will, and so all the group classes that already started. So crazy thing is, I started with private lessons, even though my parents didn't have the money for that. So that's why I got pulled out at 8. And even the song kind of ended halfway through. I'll never forget, almost like I left off, kind of didn't finish. It was Andrew Lloyd Webber, Music of the Night from Phantom of the Opera. And it was a modern dance class I'll never forget. So in high school, by chance, which I don't believe in, my mom moved across town, and I ended up at the only high school in the area that had a dance program. And a girl took me to a rehearsal, friend of mine that I'm still in touch with. And I was just like, I have to do this again. And I'll never forget my high school counselor telling me I should take Spanish because I would use it more. Although, as you know, I used it a little bit today. But she said I would use it more than dance, right? So that was the first time and I'm, as you know, also a big believer in following your intuition. And dance just felt super important. It didn't make any sense. I was trying to get out of this small town, but it was just the most exciting thing in my life, right? And I saw an example of people around that didn't really follow their passion, and I was kind of like hell bent on sticking to mine, and so I was already choreographing and putting on shows by the time I left high school. And I started as a sophomore in the dance program, and I was lucky to have an amazing mentor named Susan Chamber, who I'm also still in touch with, that really saw my passion for it and gave me opportunities. She actually gave me my first paid choreography job when I was a senior, which was choreographing Fame. So for my rival high school. um, so I started taking dance classes outside of school, and I realized this is like really what I want to do. I loved choreographing and I loved putting concepts together and still do. And so I just held on to it, and then I got to college and I realized I was way out of my league and behind technically, and I had to work really hard and after school and after class. And again, I had mentors that helped me kind of catch up, right? And then, but I think that all developed this side of me that, really wanted to produce. And when I got here, I knew I wasn't going to get picked for auditions. I wasn't that talented of a dancer. So I just thought, well, if I produce my own shows, I could put myself in, and now I just, I hire the girls that are they're actively doing it, and I'm happy to be just in the background kind of coordinating.
And when you said you moved to New York City?
Yeah, so right after college in 2005 I moved to New York. It's kind of just where everyone went if they were serious about dance. I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. I knew I was interested in dance, theater, and music. I had no idea how I was going to get into any of them, and it all just sort of happened, and I thought I would pick one, honestly, and I ended up combining them all. So I loved doing any kind of dance theater, musicians, dancers. I like kind of interesting juxtapositions to, throwing two things together, like opera and burlesque. Let's see what happens if we do that, or hip hop and ballet. So that's kind of always what drove me here, is the other artists doing amazing things and seeing how I can combine them,
That's really, and I love your determination that, like, even though, you were pulled out of dance class, you said, this is what I want to do. And you found a way to keep doing it. And then even like, it must have been so hard when you went to college to feel behind, that, so dancers have been dancing since they were like 3 or 4, and like their body shape is different.
Yeah.
They're like, the bones literally are different
Yeah.
because of the training that they've had. And I have experienced that myself, where it's very daunting when, the people around you have had decades on you in training. And it's like, I'm in awe of your ability to keep going and to say, no, this is what I love. I'm going to keep doing it.
I always think my fear of regret was so much bigger than my fear of failure, which I had and still have, and I think every time you try to get to a new level, which this feels like a new level to me, like I'm amazed that someone that's been on Broadway and these burlesque stars are willing, to work with me at this level. I remember, rehearsing girls in my living room and in my garage when I was in high school, and my mom getting mirrors from somewhere, who knows where, and but I'm just in awe that it's still part of my life and that I've been able to maintain it this long, and it does feel like, a manifestation, something I dreamt about for a long time, kind of coming true. And it's a perfect combination of two different worlds like I love. So yeah, it took a lot of work. There definitely were the hard times where you're like, is it gonna work? It took me 4 auditions to get into my college dance department, over a year. And that whole time you're thinking, should I give up? Should I take a different major that makes more sense? Definitely people are putting that thought in your head. And that was when my intuition was just so quiet, but so strong. And I just trusted it was leading me somewhere, but I could have never really imagined to be 3 blocks down from Times Square or near the New Amsterdam Theatre, so it's amazing.
I love that so much. And it's one of the cool things about being in New York is that we are able to be in the presence of like all these amazing historic
Yeah.
places and like get the energy of these places. I think that it's very extraordinary. And
Yeah.
a lot of places have since been demolished, but there is some of that history. Like it's very much on the streets.
It's amazing, the history. I love that. That's what I love about just even the women we're portraying. They have these amazing, fascinating, also similar challenges, right, with auditions and trying to struggle as a performer, and then adapting to movies coming in and taking over. And I think that we all the people involved in my show relate to that struggle or those lifestyles, and want to honor them. So it's pretty amazing to be part of the history, I would say.
Yeah. Let's dive into that. Dive straight into the show. So for folks that are yet to see it, we all are yet to see it. Can you give us a rundown of what the show is?
Oh, so basically, I chose girls that it's almost, I swear, it's almost like they're reincarnated versions of the originals. Like, not only do they look similar, but they have acts that are unique to their characters or hark back to sort of the original acts or just some of the same talents. So it'll be a mix. A lot of them are burlesque stars, but we're going to use burlesque to tell the story, even though they weren't necessarily burlesque dancers. But many of them posed nude. It came from the Follies Bergère in Paris, which was a topless show. But we're going to use it to tell the story about the unraveling of some of their lives. Our mutual friend, Kim Faye Greenberg, she has a fabulous Fanny Brice show, and she's going to be our host. And that idea actually came from the performers. We all met together. I see it as a collaboration. I had this vision that came from the book of photographs by Alfred Cheney Johnson. They're kind of those iconic Follies Girls photographs. I've literally had this book for 10 years, moving around to different places in me. And it was the right time and people. And so I met with them and we all kind of talked it out. And I would have never had that idea. And it's a perfect idea for Fanny to tell the stories of their lives in between their acts so that we know more about the women, right? Kind of how they started their rise. And then for some of them, their fall or their legacy. What they've left behind is pretty amazing. I think that most of them created a lot of these images in pop culture that we don't even attribute to them. They don't even get the credit. Like the whole flapper look came from Louise Brooks, and she had it her whole life. She didn't invent it, right? It was her. But the point of the show to me is not just to perform acts or to replicate acts, but kind of these girls' interpretation of who these women were and a new take on acts that really show the real side of them. And it's beautiful and tragic and sad, but also it is history, right? So I'm looking forward to it because I think it's going to tell a fuller picture of the Follies girls than most people have gotten to know just by seeing, a spectacle or showgirl act kind of thing. So that's what I'm looking forward to. And there will be some original photos hopefully involved and quotes of theirs, things that kind of give us a fuller picture of the women.
How did you land on these 5 women in particular?
Oh, well, they're all, I've only worked with a couple of them. Some of them I've been talking to for a while and it just hasn't worked out due to scheduling or whatever, but I just saw them for some reason as these women. They're also very, easygoing and willing to be creative and work on new acts or adapt acts they have to fit the character more specifically. And I felt like they would be respectful of the characters. Of course, Kim's kind of like, yeah.
Oh, you go ahead.
Oh, I
Kim
didn't.
is her specialty is Fanny Brice.
Fanny. So that was an easy one. I just saw Edie as kind of like my little minx, and she said that Louise Brooks was like her dream role. So it just kind of fit perfectly. Rosie Cheeks actually does an act that's original to the Midnight Frolic that just happened to be the character that she looks just like. So yeah, there's a lot of like faded element to it, I feel like, and I certainly want to expand it. I'm hoping to include more characters, more women in future volumes, like volume 1. But definitely excited about who I have. Also in Dandy, she makes these beautiful elaborate headdresses that her character is sort of known for also. So
yeah. And so did you kind of like meet these women and talk to them about various Follies stars, and like did you have the Follies stars in mind first and then sort of sort out the women, or which way did it go?
Yeah, good question. I mean, there's so many women, it was hard to decide which ones am I going to portray. And what I kind of did for this one was I chose 5 that were sort of different from each other so that the show would be more well-rounded, that they all had sort of different life trajectories. And like, for example, we talked about Whiskey Jules playing Julie Newmar, and she was not an original Follies girl, but her mother was. And she was in the 50s version and she's still alive. She's actually kind of the only living Follies girl left. So I thought, what an amazing person to include because, she represents the beginning and the end of the Follies, sort of. So, and Whiskey Jules is a trained dancer and ballerina, just like Julie was, which I didn't even know. That's the crazy part, is I didn't even know at first some of their how aligned they really were. But I did pick kind of five um, characters first, and then I kind of looked for who I had around that, you know, would be able to portray them also, but be flexible with the show kind of being adapted as we make it, which is not
Mm.
how burlesque, burlesque stars usually show up. They do their two acts they already have, and then they go, or actresses, they get a script. And this was definitely more of a collaboration. And I was so excited that they were willing to work on that with me and have more of a storyline to it.
Oh, I'm sure there was like, as a performer, like the chance to create work like that is a dream. So I'm sure they were like thrilled to dive in.
Yeah. And I didn't know, I was like, I don't know if that's too much work beyond what I could pay them for or what, but that's why I met with them, just, respect their time and say, what are you willing to do? How do you see this character? And some of them had different takes than me for an act. And I'm going with that because I'm like, I think Ziegfeld was all about glorifying the American woman. In any of my shows, I've always tried to use the women I have in front of me or men and kind of bring out what's unique and cool about them. And so I want them to do that as part of the process while they're bringing out what's unique about their character, if that makes sense.
And I love that Julie Newmar she was in a lot of movie musicals that,
Yeah.
like, I have a list here. I and one I watched recently for the first time, The Bandwagon, which is just, oh my
Oh
God,
my
it is the
gosh.
most, I can't
Isn't
believe I'd never seen it till recently, and it's just so glorious.
isn't Sid Charisse in that also? I think there's a
He
scene in that
is.
movie that's I think it's the best dance scene of all time, where they're like flying across the bar room, and it looks so natural. It's like a big fight scene or something.
Yeah.
But Julie Newmar was actually, she was a prima ballerina at age 15. Like she left
Mm.
school at 15 and became a choreographer for Universal and a ballerina. It's like some of these women were really like creative geniuses. And we hear she's Catwoman, but we don't hear about her whole trajectory, her mom's legacy and all of that too. Her mom was known
Mm.
as having the best legs in the Follies by Eddie Cantor, but she also, I mean, her legs are like 10 miles long, right? So and she's still
That's
spunky too. She
mm.
made a comment about, her balance isn't the same, but if she's in public and needs to steady herself, she'll just find the nearest good looking guy kind of thing. And I'm like, I love that.
Oh my gosh, she sounds like such a character. I hope
Yeah.
that you do get to meet her.
Oh, me too. We tried to reach out, and she was so sweet and generous to Whiskey Jules, who's portraying her, was in LA for the Burlesque Festival in Hollywood this last weekend, but they weren't able to meet up. But we're hoping someday, we definitely invited her, or at least offer her a live stream to watch from home.
That's so perfect that you're live streaming, and like what an extraordinary kind of turn of events that like a show in New York would be accessible to her in LA, and
Right.
like now that she's in her she's 90, I think you said.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah,
She
it's
looks amazing still too.
of course. I bet she's so glamorous.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And yeah, it's kind of funny, right? Like the modern version of the Follies being online.
It's interesting, like someone like Ziegfeld was kind of interested in what they could do on stage, like what you're always using the latest at anything to make spectacle, and like
Yep.
how, and same with kind of someone like Fosse, like how would they be using what we have available today to make art?
I read a massive biography of his, and I didn't realize, like, he was definitely an innovator, and he also borrowed from the past, and I've always seen
Mhm.
myself as someone that kind of marries traditional vintage stuff with sort of a modern take. And I didn't realize Ziegfeld was doing that. He, would take the Folies Bergère, but then he would add in new elements. Like he was one of the first to hire Black actors as stars or comedians and pay them the same as their white counterparts, or to put them on stage together in Showboat, as you probably know. He was the one that actually produced Showboat on Broadway. So he was very innovative, and he was all about it just being good, beyond being the spectacle. He did care about class and it being good, and them the performers being taken care of. So, but he definitely threw money at things in order to innovate and make the newest, biggest thing.
Yeah. While he wasn't what's the word I'm trying to use? A polite way of putting it, that he was philandering with half the cast.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. Olive Thomas was one of his famous mistresses, for sure. He kept her
Yeah.
portrait on his wall. Yeah, maybe not the best example of a husband, but certainly an impresario, right?
And poor Olive Thomas, reading about her story is so tragic.
Oh,
That she was so young, married to Jack Pickford, and
mhm.
then they took a second honeymoon in Paris, and then she swallowed, either by accident or intentionally, it's unclear, mercury bichloride, which was a topical treatment for syphilis.
Right.
Like, oh God.
There's actually a video of them on the boat on the way there on the steamship, and they look so happy and excited. And I definitely
Mm.
think it was a tragic accident. I mean, he actually tried to jump overboard on his way back to New York, and he remarried, I think, another Follies girl or something, but he never really got over it. They were
Mhm.
definitely like an ill-fated, star-crossed lover story, but she was only 25 when she passed, and she had already had this meteoric rise to fame, first in the Follies, like, I mean, she was just quick to fame everywhere. Like, she won the most beautiful girl in New York contest, became a Follies girl, went to the Midnight Frolic, which was only for the most beautiful and popular girls. And then when she went to LA, immediately movie star, right? So she was just like almost an overnight success from a very poor steel mining town in Pennsylvania. I mean, those are stories I'm like, they're amazing. And then the tragic, it was like almost the highest high and the lowest low, right? But they
Mhm.
say, she's still around. So
Yeah, the
haunting the
I
New
read this.
Amsterdam.
What is her like? Does she appear as a like, sometimes the ghost will appear as like a lavender smell, or like
Mm.
there's different stories. Do you know what is her
People
signature?
actually see her, like full on see her in the balcony. I know people that have seen her. They describe her as wearing, like, sometimes carrying the bottle, or in a green dress, and that
Oh,
people
that's
have said,
creepy.
yeah, that people have said that they've been like ushered to their seats by a woman who then disappeared. But I went there for the first time, and people told me she also messes with the elevator and will just take people to random floors, but usually only like after hours, like not during a show. It'll be like when nobody's around. But they keep photos of her, or portraits of her at every entrance and exit, and the cast actually say hello and goodnight to her every day because that's how present she is there. But kind of makes sense to me. I mean, she had this tragic death in Paris, and I think one of the happiest times of her life was probably when she worked there with Ziegfeld, before that tumultuous relationship. So, kind of makes sense to me. And she is buried in the Bronx. They
Mm-hmm.
brought her, she
At
was,
Woodlawn.
yeah, they brought her back to New York. So, um, yeah, a famous star of her day. Pretty amazing, though. I mean, they're just kind of iconic, I mean, to have that kind of a just shoot from, she was working at 15 to, being in Paris at the Ritz, in less than 25 years, right?
Yeah. And at a time when like Paris was like this cultural hub, like lots of Americans were living there, and it's the kind of like that what did they call it? There was
They're like
like
the
an A.
expats, right? Or the
Yeah.
cafe society, like
Yeah.
Hemingway and everyone just gathering around all day. Must
Yeah,
have been fun,
Gertrude Stein and
Yeah.
Picasso, and yeah, it's like this
Yeah.
amazing period of time in Parisian history, that this
Yeah.
like very artistic, cultured, drug taking group of people.
I was gonna say,
um
other than that, that's sort of how I feel doing this. It's like I need to be surrounded by all these like creative people and like open to their ideas, and
Mm.
interpretation. So
And I, again, like, how great that you're telling these stories, because like, to the average person, like if you said Olive Thomas, like people wouldn't necessarily recognize
right.
that name. So how
Right.
wonderful that you can like make these names known again.
Yeah, I feel like it's important, especially when they created a lot of the things in popular culture that they don't necessarily get the credit for. And it's kind of lost to history. And I think it's important to remember history and to remember the sacrifices women made too, right? A lot of them left their towns. I could relate to that part of the story. Louise Brooks left a small town in Kansas and talk about Wizard of Oz and kind of tried her luck in New York, and
Mm.
so I could relate to them, I guess, too, and I'm sure many of the people in my cast could also.
And I
So yeah.
love the Louise Brooks story, that like a movie star in the 20s and 30s, and then kind of fell into obscurity. And then finally, the French connection again, that a French filmmaker found her reels, found her old movies,
Mhm.
and brought screened them, and she found a new following, and then like in her later half of her life became a film writer, like a film critic and a film, like a person who wrote about film is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, she's so fascinating because she actually describes herself as insecure. I read part of her book and then passed it on to the performer playing her, but she describes herself as very insecure and shy and feeling like when
Mm,
she came to New York, like she didn't fit in with this high society, didn't have the table manners, had to learn, right? And that's what's interesting to me about the Follies women is like they had to reinvent themselves, right? And then she was one of the few that actually didn't believe in the own myth that she created. She actually hated Hollywood, she said. She saw herself as a serious dancer. She was actually a modern dancer like I was and studied with some of the same people. She was in a troupe with Martha Graham. One of my teachers was a Graham dancer. So, but then life took her a different way. And it's funny that it came back around to her. And I'm glad she got that chance at the end because she left Hollywood feeling almost like a failure, and went back to Kansas for a while, actually, and wasn't doing well. But what I love about them is they're real women. She talked about when she struggled when she came back, with alcoholism and stuff to deal with, life. And that they were, what I realized in retrospect is they were dealing with the time shifting. The jazz age was carefree. And then with the stock market crash and movies becoming big, they'd reinvent themselves again. So they were such survivors and so resilient. And that's what I think I love about their stories is that, they always kept moving forward somehow.
I love that, and I love like that idea of reinvention, that you have to adapt for the time that you're living in, and uh, all the while pursuing your passion. Like that was at the end of the day
Right.
that they wanted to be artists and dancers and
And the,
writers and
and the type of women they wanted to be, right? They were kind of rebels. They didn't really conform. They were willing to step outside of, what women were expected of at the time. And even Olive Thomas, she has an amazing quote on death where she said, basically, we shouldn't take anything too seriously because we could be here today, gone tomorrow. I could be in fame today, I could be obscure tomorrow. So we should just, enjoy and not worry too much.
Mm.
They're pretty amazing.
Yeah. It's and this like kind of almost ironic thing where the idea like glorifying the American girl, that like this idea of beauty and always being
Mm,
stunning and always like being surrounded by beautiful things, and how like that juxtaposition that like you only will ever be seen that way, that like you
mm,
can only be seen as something to look at rather than someone who has intelligence and skills
yeah,
and
right.
is an
But
athlete.
Ziegfeld said to glorify beauty is to glorify truth. So I think, and that's how I see art, right? It's like they're taking whatever they've been through in their life and making something beautiful out of it, right? And
Mm.
I'm sure that Louise Brooks used parts of her, childhood, the parts that she saw as hypocritical too, and turned it into, her acting ability, right? So I think there is a truth in them that I love, that they were authentic to themselves, right?
Mm. Oh, and like what a gift to be like how hard you have to work for that, and what a gift to be able to do that.
Right, right. And they did it against kind of all odds and then also against changing times,
Mm.
and in a male dominated world where they really had little power or control, which unfortunately
Yeah.
probably hasn't changed too much. But I think they started a revolution. I think they gave, from what I've read, they gave women power, right? They gave women sort of like that first they've been described as like the first superstars, or like think of like a Victoria's Secret model of today, how aloof they are and how unattainable they are. That was new then, that hadn't existed before, right? The closest thing before that was the Gibson girl, who was kind of like the perfect Victorian ideal, and they were like, we're in charge, we have all the power. Socialites were giving up their status to become Ziegfeld girls because they had more power over men. Men would come to their shows and offer them jewels and offer them a lifestyle. And Marion, that happened to Marion Davies. She married Hearst and ended up living at Hearst Castle, right? So their lives had the potential to change, from just being a Ziegfeld girl, but it was all through that kind of, I don't want to say reckless self-abandonment, but it was like, throwing themselves at the world and putting themselves out there. And I think it's a brave instinct they all had, right?
Yeah. And I love that like talking about like women having power and women having control, that Mae Murray and Fanny Brice too were both producers, that they've
Mm,
as well as performing, they produced behind the scenes.
Right. And Fanny, I think, was one of the first, if not the first, our friend Kim would know, right? Radio
Mhm.
star, female radio star. She created her own. She realized that her character that she created was popular and made it into a radio show where many of the others were afraid to speak, right? Because they'd only ever been
Mm.
dancers and afraid to be on camera. And some of them didn't survive the talkies, right? They were good in silent films, but not so much in talkies, where May struggled with that.
Mm.
May definitely had a sharp decline kind of after the talkies came in, and rough time adapting to that
Yeah.
time
But
period.
that kind of, there was this like brief period of like of about 20 years where Hollywood, like when it was still silent film,
Hmm.
and there were a ton of female producers and directors that have
Hmm.
kind of been like, we've kind of forgotten them from history,
Hmm.
but like I'm
Hmm.
thinking like Gloria Swanson was one of them,
Mm.
who Sunset Boulevard is based on,
Ah.
that like that she had her own production company, and like these incredible women who wanted to make art and
Hmm.
were able to, and then like the talkies changed the industry, but these women were creating film and directing film, like
Amazing.
for the
Yeah.
2 decades.
And Louise Brooks, she did some of her own stunts, and she actually, was probably
Mm.
this before we had unions, right? So, she also spoke up about, I'm not going to do that stunt, like that's too risky. And her book Lulu in Hollywood was really interesting. You'd probably love it, but it just it talked a lot about her whole journey from the modern dance life she thought she was going to have to how Ziegfeld changed her life and how she ended up in this movie thing. But she was such a great observer and writer.
Mm.
And she was like a lifelong reading fan. So, and I
Mm.
loved her. She had such a witty, um, sarcastic view on things, because I think she always saw through people, and kind of saw to the truth of things. And I don't think much got past these women. And I know the women I have, they're tough ladies, they're beautiful, they're talented, but they're tough. They have opinions, which I appreciate. I love them being involved in this. It's probably the most collaborative show I've done. I used to do all the
Mm.
choreography and do control every aspect of it. And it's so interesting. It's a journey for me to see, what they're creating.
Mm.
And I'll guide it a little bit. I'll suggest music or talk to them about ideas, but I do really want it to also reflect. I don't think we should ever completely duplicate history, right? It's like, what's the point? I don't think Ziegfeld would have done that. I think he would have given an homage to the history and then added a new twist. So I love to see their take on these women, right? And we could have a whole new cast where maybe they have a different take on the same women. So I think that's how they kind of live on, and also don't become like caricatures, right? Because
Yeah.
they're so much more interesting and have more depth than that.
Mm. Oh, I love that. So what has the rehearsal process been? You mentioned meeting up with all the girls, with
So there
the five
isn't one.
actors.
That's what's
Oh.
interesting. So at first I thought we would do, and we still probably will have some sort of group intro finale. But it's not going to be group based. Well, the individual acts won't be. They're working on acts individually. So some of them already had acts that works and are being slightly adapted or costumes changed up. There will be some little surprises, but it'll span, from some original historic acts to kind of whole new takes on uh, maybe even a movie they were in, instead of just duplicating the act they did. And in one, we're actually going to recreate kind of a different act from a movie. And it'll be a new take on, won't be the exact choreography, right? We'll take a new take on that. But they're pretty much working on them on their own individually, with a little guidance from me and some uh, music suggestions. But I'm big on soundscapes and atmosphere and having like a whole feel to the show. So that's why I curate a little bit, just so it doesn't seem so separate. Like they're all still related at the end of the day. And we talked a lot about soloist versus ensemble. Really, these girls, a lot of them were part of a chorus, but some of them were soloists and featured, and these girls certainly are. So we want the ensemble feel with still a group of individual women, right? Which is what says a lot about the originals anyway.
Mm.
So I am creating sort of some other pieces for in between that will make it a narrative thread, instead of just, they're not going to be random acts by any means. They're going to
Yeah.
definitely be structured around a storyline, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, I that sounds fascinating. And how much of like this backstory will we get in the acts of these women?
Yeah, I think so. That'll be Fanny's job, is to give us the history on the women. And I definitely want people to know sort of how they rose to fame and where they came from, and um, what's and they all have unique characteristics, and even, sort of a phrase they were known for, that I want to point out. Like, there's just some really interesting facts about all of them, and that's what I want to highlight, is the things people might not know. And then, yeah, I do want to talk about, some of the how it ended for all of them, and
Mhm.
even though some of it is tragic, I still think it's important to know. Um, but I plan to end on a lighter note, because I think that's how they all were. They still had lives of beauty and intrigue and fascinating and scandals, some of them. So I definitely want to get to some of that. And I think people are going to be surprised at how many of our modern day things actually started with these women. Like, the first Hollywood scandal started with Mae Murray, and the first big celebrity funeral started with Olive Thomas, right?
Mm.
So they were a lot bigger than I think people realize. They weren't just chorus girls or even soloists. They were kind of the popular culture icons of the time. That's why I start with men wanted them and women wanted to be them.
What was Mae Murray's scandal?
Oh, she had a couple. She got blacklisted by Louis B. Mayer because she got talked out of a contract by her husband at the time. And so he pretty much barred her from Hollywood for that.
Mm.
And then there was a scandal with a masseuse who said she owed her $2,000. And she was a famous celebrity masseuse. And that was very humiliating for her because it was in the public, and probably she couldn't afford it. I don't know. But it was like a little over 2,000. So it was probably embarrassing because it wasn't, a huge amount for a star, but it might have been for her. Um, yeah. And, it's like the getting canceled today, right? Is basically and then she had to survive after that, right?
Yeah.
And how she did that, we're going to tell kind of the story of that. But I
Mm.
hope that we're telling, even the tragic parts with some honor to what I see it more as honoring what they survived, because at the end of the day, they all still added a lot to our culture, and they all still had amazing lives.
Mm. I'm curious, does Ziegfeld factor into like he's like the kind of common thread amongst all these women that
Mm,
like he put them on the stage,
hmm
or brought them to fame really.
hmm
Will he does is he represented at all in the show?
It's interesting. Originally, I was thinking about having a male MC, and then I thought about having no MC, actually. But I realized it's really important to me to tell the stories. So I realized, like, how many times in history do women's stories get told by men and through the lens of a man, right? So I realized, I'm like, I kind of want it to be an all-female cast. I want them to be able to tell their
Yes.
own stories, whether it's through movement or, through Fanny, someone up here, right? So that made a lot of sense to me. But I do honor Ziegfeld because I actually do think that he honored these women. I don't, even though he was kind of salacious and had mistresses and things like that, he did actually treat them well. He paid them well. He worked them hard, but he got them the best costumes. He bought them silk stockings instead of the cheap stuff. And I guess I try to honor him by being like him in that way. Like,
Mm.
it's important to me that they feel honored and that they feel like individuals. And we had a lot of debate about the finale for that reason, but I think we found a good compromise because I
Ooh.
certainly don't want to make them all the same, and I definitely want to have other casts where we add other types of performers. There are a lot of other specialty performers like Josephine Baker and stuff like that,
Mm.
and honor some of his legacy of, how he had multi racial casts too. And so this is just volume one, but I am going to have definitely a quote from him in there at some point, probably that one I mentioned earlier, because I do think he had such a big vision, and that their fame was a byproduct of his like utter determination to get stuff up, and I can relate to that a lot. So, um, and he was a gambler. He threw a lot of money at things. It was kind of like no expense spared, for them to be as glamorous and for it to be as expensive as possible, right? And so I think that deserves to be honored too, and the effort he went into to keep mounting these every year, you know. And there's stories that he was like a nervous wreck, which I think all producers can relate to on opening night, pacing the lobby, right? Pacing, like he couldn't even watch his own shows, but but I think the way he glamorized women too, it was a respect for him. I think he put them on a pedestal, right? And so, and they all saw him more as like almost like a father figure who took care of them. In fact, like even after all, he was very upset that Olive Thomas left the Follies for that movie career and for that guy that ended up being her downfall, which is another fascinating thing, that they all kind of lived and died by that it's almost like the thing that drove them is what also took them down eventually. But he even still paid for her funeral, things, sent flowers, and took care of medical expenses. Like he actually took care of many of them after they left the Follies. And I think that's pretty rare, right? The relationship he had, where he actually cared about their lives, even when they sort of betrayed him, right? So
yeah. It's such a fascinating piece of New York history that has had so much influence. Like, it's so funny to me that, like, 100 years later, when people think of a stereotypical musical, like they're referencing Ziegfeld.
yeah,
Like they're referencing the Follies, and it's like it
everything.
hasn't been on stage for 100 years, and it's still like, or 50. The latest in the 50s there was the Ziegfeld Follies musical.
Yeah, and I think you can't leave him out, right? You can't leave him out, right? Because he, like every Vegas show, every show in Atlantic City, every showgirl with the big headdresses, which wasn't original to him either. He got all that from the Follies Bergère. I just got a book about that yesterday. But he brought it to another level, and people know him for it. So it's definitely, they influenced a lot,
Yeah, very, very much so. So can you give us the details of when the show will be happening? And I will have links, of course, in the show notes.
Thank you. Yeah, it's going to be at the Green Room 42 on April 13th. It's one night only right now. It's at 7:00, 7 to 8:15 actually. So it's a short show, but you can get there at 6 when doors open and have a nice sit-down dinner. It's a cabaret, lounge venue, very intimate, which I thought was perfect for this. You can be up close with the girls. And, I'm sure we'll all go have a nice drink downstairs. It's the top floor of the Yotel, or fourth floor of the Yotel Hotel building on 42nd and 10th Avenue. And there are live stream options. So if you're not in New York, you can watch from anywhere, which I'm super excited about. So my family's in California. And that's $19. So I say it's better than a movie, right? Disney. So you watch live theater online as I know you promote. And then I think it's pretty affordable. It's like $20 to $45 depending on where you sit. So yeah,
it's fabulous. And
yeah.
we'll have links to that in the show notes. And I cannot wait to see. And I have this feeling like we're going to be seeing volume 2, volume 3 coming up. Like there's so many amazing stories to tell, and your passion for it is very evident. And I can't wait to see the volume 1.
Oh, thank you so much. And I really appreciate this time with you. And
my pleasure. Well, before we wrap up, I have my final segment. It's called My Favorite Things, where I ask you my favorite questions.
These are a few of my favorite things.
To start with, what is your favorite musical?
Ooh, I think Cabaret.
I like that. You must be excited for the revival that's opening on Broadway soon.
Yes.
I saw it in London. It's amazing.
I saw it at Studio 54, where you get to sit down like it was an actual cabaret club. Awesome.
Yeah, super cool. It's a beautiful show. What is your favorite filmed live musical?
Ooh. I mean, I'm a Wizard of Oz buff, so that's probably, I guess that's not a live musical though. There's so many. How do you choose?
Depends on my mood, time of day.
I do love me some Fosse, just the original Fosse, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's one of my favorites too.
Yeah.
A filmed live musical is not exactly a stage show, and it's not exactly a movie. So what should we call it?
I think we should call it online live entertainment.
Oh, I like that.
Because it is live, right? It wasn't filmed like a movie where you get to cut and you have the luxury of, splicing things together, but it's not live in person, right? So, but it's probably the next best thing, right?
I love that. Where do you stand on bootlegs?
Oof. I mean, the problem with that is the original artists are the ones that get screwed, right? The people that spent all the money producing it. And as someone that produces, it takes so much more money and time and effort than we usually get reimbursed for, right? And we have to guarantee things like paying performers, right? People sometimes forget, even the live stream doesn't all go to me, right? So I think that it's wrong to not pay the people that originally produce the work, right? And that if you're undercutting, artists who are already probably struggling. So I'm a big fan of what you're doing for that reason.
Why, thank you. What stage musicals do you wish had been filmed?
Oh, I guess I don't know all the ones that have been filmed, but I could say that Music Man was one of the first ones I ever saw. Little Shop of Horrors was another one. I also did Anything Goes in college, so I think those would be awesome to see live. I also recently saw Once Upon a Mattress, which reminded me of the first thing I ever saw live, and I was trying to figure out how they did everything backstage. So those are some I would love to see. Sutton Foster is awesome. Yeah.
Of that list, you can watch Anything Goes on Broadway HD with Sutton Foster. They filmed it in London.
Oh.
But the others have not yet been filmed, but Anything Goes was filmed at the Barbican. So you can watch that one.
Yeah.
What would you like to see filmed in the future?
Oh, I mean, maybe we'll get lucky and our show could be on there someday. I mean, I would love to see this go further, off Broadway, something like that. Other shows.
Yeah, Residency.
Yeah. I mean, I love anything that I always loved. Spring Awakening was one that stood out to me as a musical because I was a modern dancer, I guess, and it was more abstract. It wasn't so much the, corny show tunes and all of that. So I like anything like that. I remember when Charles Palminteri did Bronx Tale. I'd love to see something like that, like, a one-man show, or Grey Gardens was another one that I really loved that I could see there being a great regional version of that,
Yeah. Oh, I love these answers. Yes. So many great shows.
You're bringing up all my archives.
And finally, where can we find you online?
So my website for producing is Nicole Nadine Productions. It's just like it sounds, NicoleNadine Productions.com. And I'm also on Instagram with the same name, Nicole Nadine Productions, or you can follow me personally, Nicole Nadine Producer. It's all the same. And that's where I post all my, most recent shows, what's going on. And even sometimes when I'm looking for performers, and I'm always happy to add new people to the roster, especially people with multiple talents and special skills, and including you. I'm hoping to work with you someday.
Let's do it. Nicole, thank you so much for your time today. I wish you all the best for the show coming up. I know it's going to be phenomenal. I can't wait to watch.
Thank you so much for all your support and for offering this awesome platform.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you to all our new listeners following on Patreon. An extra special thanks to our paying members, Josh Brandon, Belinda Broider, Jeremy Broll, Elliot Charles, Vincent Doyon, Rachel Esteban, Mercedes Esteban Lyons, Hannah Graneman, Alison Matthews, David Negrin, Jesse Rabinowitz and Brenda Goodman, David and Catherine Rabinowitz, and Joe Tillotson. Your financial support helps to continue the preservation of the history of film stage musicals and the curation of one easy place to find them all. You can also now make a one-off or recurring tax-deductible donation to Filmed Live Musicals via The Phil. Visit filmedlivemusicals.com to learn more. The Filmed Live Musicals podcast is created and edited by your host, Luisa Lyons. FilmedLiveMusicals.com features information on nearly 200 filmed stage musicals from around the world and dating back to 1938, a newsletter with upcoming streams, and this very podcast. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Make sure to sign up for the free newsletter. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thanks for listening.